I was just thinking, listening to your presentation, I think it's a very impressive kind of results. But you have to probably have to tie into many, let's say, Puma internal systems to get all these data into
Hmm.
this collective platform. So, what is the implementation time for a project like this? Is that
Yeah, it's certainly true that you need to know what data you have and where it lives. Good news is that Anodot has integrations into a lot of common APM tools and other sources that you can pull out of. So in our case, we have a monitoring tool by another Israeli company, which is called Coralogics, that has been able to get a lot of great metrics for us. And we also have a streaming export from Google Analytics into BigQuery, and then we can read that data from BigQuery into Anodot. So if you know where your data lives and you have access to it, you can get it in pretty quickly.
Thank you. All right. So payment optimization. Um, you know, when you take it from a merchant perspective, Sam, you were working for a large global merchant. So when it comes to new payment solutions, what are the first things that you're thinking about?
If you mean from a merchant perspective, so yeah, I mean, thank you first for inviting me onto the panel. It's nice to be here. From a merchant perspective, the first things that we're thinking about is, I guess, we spend so much time trying to force ourselves to think from a customer first perspective. There shouldn't be any reason that we don't do so when we're at the receiving end of it, I guess. So, what should we consider before we start talking about solution? And I'm talking from a tier one merchant perspective, so a long established retail company that's bricks and mortar and e-commerce. We've got a lot of layers of legacy systems that we probably wish we didn't have anymore. If we'd had any choice, we'd probably start it all again and start from scratch. But we don't have that option, at least in the short term. And we've got a lot of stakeholders as well. So the merchant is a bit like that brain in the Pixar film with all the different emotions going on. But you've only got a couple of them at the table or on the Zoom call at any one time, and they're all thinking different things. And most of it is probably about hygiene factors. What's going to stop us doing what we do well today in the future if we change something? So I mentioned the layers on top of our systems. That's a really quite delicate ecosystem. How many things are we going to have to change? What else is it going to change that we don't want to change? What will make us less agile towards change in the future? And then we've got automated tools for reconciliation. So if we're adding a new APM, for example, is there going to be a data requirement that is really difficult for us to meet when we add something else in? Is it going to be consistent with what we already do today? I mentioned the stakeholders. We've got people like data scientists who might get upset if we do that as well. And then the big factor, and increasingly so as we all live and breathe this day and age, cost. It's got to be so very decently value driven that it overcomes any cost factor that we might consider. Because coming again from an IKEA perspective, we're quite a low margin business. We want to make sure that we stay that way as much as is possible. So if we're adding something, it's got to not be at the detriment of our value to our customers. So
Right, and Peter, I very much like your picture. Had a very complex one, where the only with two PSPs and two acquires already look pretty impressive. I think for somebody like IKEA, that could be much more complex. So how do you go about working with a global client like a Puma, like IKEA, where you can only add things that doesn't disturb anything that's already ongoing? So
Yeah, I think the most important factor is that what's just been said is the first thing to do is the data layer. What data do you have, and which data do you have too much? How many times do you see your customer records and so on? So I think the first cleanup exercise is on the data level from where everything comes. And that is not by IT. That are data scientists today who are really doing detailed studies and detailed analysis on that. I think that's the step, the first step for an international retailer or merchant to say, okay, do I have a consistent stream of data? And then the advantage of these orchestrations is you don't need to do everything at once. You can step by step integrate services, drop other services. And if you do it on a modern architecture, then the APIs and integrations can be done. Okay, there is legacy, and often legacy means not so nice APIs, but that's the reality of life. We always and sure on Money 2020 a couple of weeks ago, everybody had we have one API, but 80% of all payment transactions happen still on a mainframe. So you need also take that reality in place, and then you can step by step. It's a journey. It's a journey. It's not a fix in 6 months. It's a journey that you need to undertake together with the customer.
Absolutely. Joe, is your perspective if you're working with large merchants and with your solutions, how do you
Yeah,
approach
so
this?
we actually we work with more than 600,000 merchants via our acquirers, the acquirers that we work with. So we see this at scale. And from my point of view, working with inside the payments chain, for me, payments optimization is a little bit different than what I've heard here. And the reason for that is that we don't think about the operational aspects of processing a payment, but rather and I'll actually talk about this on Thursday during a plenary session. How can we look at one transaction individually and make sure that it's that we are able to optimize it for cost, authorization rate, so make sure that that specific transaction gets through, as long as, and of course I represent a fraud detection company, as long as the transaction is bears no risk. So I would say that some of the larger tier one merchants that we work with directly or indirectly, they have these issues, but it's really about optimizing the actual transaction from our point of view.
Is there sometimes is there always an optimization? Because if you talk about fraud, and the other side you have the false declines, right? If you put it too strongly, you get lots of false declines, which is actually a nightmare for a company because you would lose the customer.
So I can lift the veil a little bit, and I can talk a little bit about what I will talk on Thursday. But it's really about looking at a transaction not as a almost a sacred entity that you cannot optimize, and look at is this channel, e-commerce, is this the optimal channel for this transaction, given that I know that this is not a fraudulent transaction? Can't I push it through another channel? Is this MCC code actually the best MCC code for this specific transaction and this specific a card that I'm seeing? So issuers tend to be quite crystallized in time, and they have authorization rules that we can reverse engineer just from the sheer volume of transactions that we see. We can actually reverse engineer issuer rules and sort of bypass some of them. So the ones that carry no benefit from a risk perspective or risk controlling perspective.
Thank you. I see already questions coming in from the audience. Don't be shy. Use your app. And if you want, you can even raise your hand and do it the old way. So I got a question here is, where's the best place to insert a fraud detection engine during or in the payment chain?
Yeah, so
I think that's your question, right?
Perhaps I can I can take that one. Yeah. So I would say that there's 4 different points in time where you can introduce a fraud detection engine. So of course, pre-authorization and pre-authentication. So before anything happens and before you've actually bothered your the cardholder with a 3DS challenge, that's a good point in time to do preemptive checks. Then once you've done authentication, some form of authentication steps, but before actually pushing the transaction through to your payment processor, or down the value chain, you can check there, and also after the fact. So after a transaction has been authorized and before settlement, there's still a window of opportunity to do something. And then there's a 4th one, which is a continuous monitoring. This is not so much for merchants. It can be, but more for acquirers. So an acquirer wants to minimize their risk. and they want to minimize risk at a portfolio level, but also merchant by merchant. So if an acquirer onboards a fraudster, and you were talking about it, so from your point of view, it's basically um, um, fraudsters who run stolen cards. What we see a lot is actually fraudsters who have those stolen cards. They open merchant accounts, and then they process those cards in their own accounts. And so the money, instead of them having to buy shoes and then resell shoes, they get money directly into their pockets, and then the liability changes to the acquirer, and that's painful. So
Absolutely. I just finished a research project, particularly that issue on the merchant risk. Well, underwriting onboarding is another issue, right? And the monitoring. How do you keep the bad guys out, but still loading lots of SMB clients onto the platform? Very interesting space to discuss another panel, maybe one day. I saw a question for Anadot. So, can you always fix the anomalies that are raised on the platform? How do you identify quick wins between the more strategic fixes?
Sure. Should I take this, Uri?
I'll tell you what we do. You answer the first one, and I'll answer the second.
The audience hasn't
Second-
even
no,
seen the
the
second
second-
one.
second part, the second part.
The second part, okay. So the answer to this question depends on your choice of measures and dimensions that you put into Anadot. So a good example would be if I have a metric for the number of adds to cart on the US Puma website, that's an extremely cyclical metric. Every week, week in, week out, it moves in the same way. And thus, if I tell Anadot that I want to get an alert only when that metric has a significantly significant drop in it, then I can be assured that that's going to be an important alert, and I can definitely fix whatever is causing that, because if I don't, I'm going to go broke. If you have like millions of metrics and your sensitivity is low, then you're going to be buried in anomalies all the time, and some of them will probably not be that interesting.
So I'll answer this question in a bit different way. So it's a good question, and it doesn't matter which solution you choose, but it has to be able to tackle 4 things. First, scaling. Scaling is something that us as people, and especially developers, are taking as granted, but it's not. It's actually not. So we need to understand how and to choose a solution that actually can scale. Second is payment data is massive. So taking that, and we need to understand what is the pain point, what's the pain, what is the workflow of the company, and who is the owner of it. Because we tend to see a lot of projects, the monitoring project, that fails because the company says, I want to monitor everything. I want to be alerted on anything, but it's just unmanageable. You can't, if you have a big company, like, for example, like Puma, you can't have a alert for each anomaly in data, because life is full of anomalies.
Mm-hmm.
Third thing is you need to understand and choose a solution that understands business. For example, if I'm monitoring, for example, an IT department, it's very easy and easy to understand. There's CPU usage, there's bandwidth, there's memory, etc. So, but there's no business in it. When if we're talking payments, I want to know, the system wants to know that the drop in payments is due to holiday bank, or due to any promotion, or due to any other thing that happens in real life. So we need to look for how to find or how to identify a quick win. We need to know to reduce the false positive alerts in order to increase the real and important alerts that we get from the anomalies. And fourth thing, I think, is time scale. Things that happen in a 5-minute time scale are invisible in a daily time scale, and vice versa. So if we're looking on a daily scale, we can see a drop. But if we're looking on an hourly scale, we won't see anything. So measuring the data in a few timescales, are highly important.
Thank you. And there are more questions for Anadots, but you're around, so I need to give to other people also. So, Peter, how can companies like yourselves, acquirers and fintechs, deliver on the merchant needs for new value-added services, optimization of their payment processes?
I think it's not only the optimization of the payment process, but optimization of payments or more payments is also by as a merchant acquirer to look to offer additional services. Reconciliation is, I think, for most merchants one of the biggest headaches they can have. So in the moment that you have all additional tools to help them with that, it is, I think the CFOs would be totally excited about that. So not only that, you see now also there are really these ecosystems where in accounting, invoicing, if you go to a certain segment in the market, let's say that you're focusing on restaurant business, that you also have the ordering system in the restaurants connected to the payment, connected to a mobile POS or a soft POS solution. So it comes more and more offering a full life cycle of experience, let's say, of the sale, not only the payment self.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Sam, can you share some, let's say, payment optimization KPIs that you're working with? What are the things that you focus on?
Yeah, I guess not so much KPIs specifically because it's not something we necessarily measure in that way. But we're looking for these, as the question said, these quick wins. Mm-hmm. Quick wins is a concept that we would love to take more of as a merchant. And there's things out there that we know that our customers want. They want to pay in different methods that we don't currently serve. They want to have a greater acceptance rate. They don't want to see the declines.
Right.
So these are the kind of quick wins that we'd be looking to address and increase our KPIs on stuff like acceptance. But let me give you an example of to demonstrate what I was referring to earlier and the difficulty to add something like that on a complex merchant infrastructure. We've just completed a tender for acquiring across Europe, pan-Europe acquiring tender. And it's literally bolt off one acquirer from the connection to the PSP, single connection, single gateway, and bolt on a new one. And in one example, we get a market whereby the rewards from a new contract with a new supplier runs to the hundreds of thousands of euros per annum. But the catch is we can't deliver that return until at least 6 months, maybe even a year, because of the difficulties of doing that single connection change. And now it sounds like that should be a really easy thing to do, but from a large merchant scale perspective, that's something that is not actually the quick win we think it is. So, well, what's the answer? Take a long-term strategic approach and change the entire infrastructure to make it easier to do that. Great, but here comes another customer that says, "Hey, I want to pay a certain way. I want you to deliver this tomorrow." Yeah. Here comes another market that says our acceptance rates are dropping way below what we want to. We need more quick wins. Park that long-term strategy. Let's do something else and further complicate the program of works.
Very recognizable from my old days in large institutions. The short term against the long term. Mm-hmm. So how can merchants measure the effectiveness of a payment optimization strategy is being asked here.
Can I maybe tell
sure, yeah.
my view on that? So, again, from my perspective, working with a lot of merchants, but not being on the merchant side, right? So, I'd say that there's three things at the end of the day that are really important for the merchant: the authorization rate, of course. How much does it cost on average to process transactions? And that, of course, takes a lot of things into consideration. So the interchange plus the strong customer authentication, etc., etc. Also, the conversion loss can be factored in the cost of a transaction. And then what's my overall fraud ratio or fraud problem with risk. So those three together, I think, are really good measures for merchants, especially in e-commerce. And but I would say it also applies well to bricks and mortar. And at the end of the day, those are potentially they are the KPIs. So really so metrics that are good proxies for the health and operation of the whole payments system.
Any other perspective on this question?
I
Because I
would-
think it's a really good one.
I would add one to it is clarity on what happened. Because a lot of merchants still today sometimes run their business almost blind. So the moment that it's not clear what you're doing, you can have the right, but you also need to know that you have the right rates or not. And that's where we see a lot of things happening, is to bring clarity in the whole idea. Also a little bit the business monitoring is also a clarity tool. So I think that's one of the major ones.
Yeah. Yeah, we did the research some time ago where we looked at, how do merchants basically manage their payments. Basically, kind of look at three models. The first one is payment is a cost of doing business, not more than that. You need to minimize cost, right? Then second is, yes, I have clear KPIs for improving my payments and optimize the payments, but it's not really a critical strategic function. And then the third type was, yeah, payment is strategic, right? It's something that is on the top priority for the company because that's going to drive eventually the top revenue. And what you see is that, yeah, the large companies are, let's say, more in the latter category. So moving towards looking at payment as strategic function. Is that something you see in your organizations, Sam or Michael? Is that?
Well, I think that the idea of data as a service is an interesting one because there was a time when it was not accessible in any shape or form, this data for an insight perspective or for automatic reconciliation or whatever it is. But as we've gone through time, companies, businesses, merchants, through partnerships or on their own, have built solutions to this problem, and maybe they're not the most effective or efficient solutions as time's gone on, and we've moved into a more omnichannel setup. So when it comes to adding something new, this almost becomes less of a value add and more of a hygiene factor because you've got something that you're now dependent on that you now can't change or modify, or at least you've got to be very careful about what you add into it or subtract from it.
Yep. Yeah, we see also the world. You can hear it in almost every session that the world has moved to real time, right? So a real time data analysis, real time payments, real time everything. There's the other side of it. There's much less time to actually have the alerts set in the right way because the transaction's already been done, and then you find out afterwards it's too late, right? So, how do you do monitoring, fraud monitoring, data monitoring in such a real-time world? Is that a challenge?
It's it is a challenge, as Michael said before. When it depends on the data you have and how you can access it. There are companies that store their data minutely, and we take it minutely and show anomalies almost real time in a minute time scale. And there are companies that are working a bit slower who and it doesn't affect them so much to have alerts only in 5-minute scale or only in an hourly scale or a daily scale. So it really it's doable. We can do it, and it is something that's happening and kicking. But once again, it depends on the business itself and how much the business wants to get alert and to being notified with anomalies or issues that happens to the business on the minute scale.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can see on a minute scale when it's a fraction of the data. You can see the metric is like a bit jittery because of it's such a small amount of data every time. So you need to understand if there, as I said before, what the pain it really is. Because having a minute timescale data and having alerts for it, it's something that it's really easy to do. But the question that you need to ask yourself is, do I need it? Do I really need to know every 1 minute if something is not working for 2 minutes. Because I have not Puma, another customer that we started. He told me, "Yeah, I want to do everything. I want to measure everything," and immediately scale. And 2 weeks later, he said, "Enough, enough. I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. I don't need the minute. I see that when it happens after 3 minutes and I get alerted, I'm saying to myself, okay, it will be fixed in the next 2 minutes. So why getting it?"
Yeah. And if I could just add, one problem that we had for a long time was that we were using commercial off-the-shelf e-commerce platforms that simply did not provide any facility for getting this kind of data out in a streaming fashion or a near real-time way. And it was only once we started to build our own custom front end from scratch that suddenly we were able to use the more state-of-the-art solutions that were out there on the market, and even kind of indirectly monitor our legacy platforms from the new system that we had built for ourselves.
Yeah, and probably also take an exercise to basically, kind of rationalize your data so that you can give the right data to somebody like Antidote to make use of, right?
Exactly.
Well, I think we'll almost come to the end of the session. Well, we could probably go on for hours on this topic, but that's for future sessions. I want to thank the audience very much for giving us questions, and that means show engagement. So thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for the very knowledgeable panel here. So applause.
Thank you.